Thanks, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Good evening, everybody. It is great to be back in Johnson County. And notice I said Johnson County because I listened. Some of you are from Iowa City, some from Lone Tree, some from Solon, some from Coralville, Riverside. I had the pleasure, and it was a pleasure in my life, to live in Iowa City for a number of years at a home right over here on Norman Trek. I love Iowa City. I love Johnson County. It's great to be home. And I should tell you, that was a wonderful introduction that I don't recognize myself, so throw all that out of your mind. But I do want you to remember a couple things about me. One, my name is Bill Stowe, and I'm a proud ICCI member. And second, and probably most relevant to what I'm going to talk about here tonight, I am with Des Moines Waterworks in Des Moines, Iowa. Several of you may be familiar with some of the things that we've been involved in. I'm going to talk about water quality uniquely from our perspective in central Iowa, but I think you're going to hear some terms, some science, some policy, some ideas that are going to be relevant to all of us as Eastern Iowans. If I could wish for anything from a public policy standpoint, it would be that environmentalism is introduced into Iowa public policy. I've got to say, even though I'm going to talk about clean water, you as Eastern Iowans need to be very attentive to what's going on with air quality in this area of our state. You have serious air quality concerns, particularly from here to the river, that will continue to be problems that you're going to hear about. And we as Iowans, for many years, have been able to be proud of our air quality and ashamed of our water quality. We do not want to get to a point where we're ashamed of both our air and our water quality. So fight forward for clean air in this state also. Talk a little bit about our business so you know kind of where I and the board that I work for are coming from. We serve 500,000 folks or so in the four-county area: Polk, Dallas, Madison, and Warren. And there are some holes in that, but generally we serve those folks either directly or through wholesale agreements. We wholesale to what's called Warren Water and Xenia Water, which are large rural suppliers in central Iowa. Very important to us. We're familiar with farming, we're familiar with suburban issues, and obviously we're pretty familiar with urban issues because I work for 5 people who are appointed by the mayor of Des Moines, Mayor Corbett, as I'm sure you realize. Mayor Frank County appoints the 5 folks who I work for, but most of our customers actually aren't in Des Moines, they're in the greater metropolitan Des Moines area. Des Moines, unlike Cedar Rapids, unlike a number of communities in Iowa, takes our water directly from the Des Moines and Raccoon River. And that's pretty important because I'm going to talk about water quality from the perspective of surface water, not groundwater. We don't have a 2,000-foot deep well into an aquifer. We're opening up a gate that looks a lot like, for those of you who come from a farm background, a cattle barrier on a road that lets water in from the Des Moines or the Raccoon River. That's where we get our drinking water, not from 2,000 feet deep in an aquifer. Aquifers have their own problems. As you know, here in Eastern Iowa, the aquifers are being depleted. We get our water from a sustainable source with problems, precipitation, and pulling them right out of the rivers themselves. But let me talk about our concerns with surface water quality in this state. Groundwater, water quality is driven by geology primarily, right? What the rock structures look like and what happens with manganese and iron and limestone. How many of you, like me, grew up on groundwater in a small town or on a farm? You were concerned about tasting like iron and having brown manganese in the water. Your mom, like my mom back then, used to go to the laundromat in a town that had surface water. Water, groundwater in the state driven by geology. Surface water quality driven by land use. I'm from Des Moines. I'm at the base of the intersection between the Raccoon and Des Moines rivers, 10,000 square miles, 90% plus of which is in farming. And that 90% that's in farming in the Des Moines and Raccoon River valleys is largely drain tile. And for those of you who may not be from a farm background, drainage tiles are about my waist high beneath the surface of the ground itself, and they're intended to drain the land that otherwise would be wetlands or prairie potholes. North central Iowa is the most recent soil, the most recent land developed by glaciation in Iowa, about 15,000 years ago. It's naturally very swampy. About 115, 125 years ago, there were drainage districts that were intended to drain that land, and they did it very well. Back when we were just concerned about having more land to farm and not concerned about the water quality coming out of those drainage tiles, that was a great thing. What we found over time is those tile systems brought more water and lesser quality water quickly downstream. In the floods of 1993 and the floods of 2008 and the floods of 2010, I was involved in the process of protecting the Des Moines area from flooding. So I come into a water job thinking that water is all about quantity. It's wet, it's dry, you have to have levee systems. You have to work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. In and of itself, an interesting process. But water in Iowa, to me, before I came into this job a few years ago, was all about quantity. Could we get enough? Could we protect ourselves when there was too much? Well, what I've learned very quickly in this job is it's really, ultimately, not about quantity, it's about quality. And the surface water quality in this state is horrible. There are those who argue that it's the best in 20 years. I'd love to see the data that supports that. When the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, right after that advertisement was made, lists the impaired waters of this state, and there are 15% more in 2015 than there were in 2013. The waters in this state, the surface waters in this state, are in horrible condition, for the most part. And certainly in central Iowa, where I'm from, we're on the Mississippi River, horrible. What we're most concerned about, the topic du jour in my world, is nitrate pollution. NO3, it is a pollutant that comes into our waters largely through agricultural uses, particularly in my watersheds, and is a huge public health concern. As I sat over here in the corner and got to hear all of you talk about what water means to you, I basically think I heard three different areas. Commerce or economic development, which is a very interesting one in my business, because I'm in the business of selling water, so I get commerce. Another one, public health. We are in the public health business. You're drinking water that if there's any problem, that is going to have huge concerns in this community. Anybody here remember cryptosporidium in Milwaukee? Not really that far from us. Public water system. People died. We can have great confidence in this country because of regulation, the regulation of safe drinking water, that our systems are safe. If you travel abroad, or as some of us do from time to time, I don't have that sense of confidence when I go just about any place in Eastern Europe, Latin America, or the United States, we can be very proud of that. So public health is something I heard from you, commerce is something that I heard from you, and also recreation, right? I don't know how many people I heard say, I used to swim in the res, but no longer would. Probably a good idea. Those three issues are extraordinarily important to all of us as Iowans and as Americans. And I think we want to keep that in mind as we talk about public policy in this state and the need to regulate for safe drinking water. We, as an industry, are heavily regulated. But what we hear is don't regulate industrial agriculture. Don't regulate the drainage districts. Don't ruin the economy of this state by regulating. We need to be more collaborative. We need to be more cooperative. Well, I tell you what, you and I can collaborate on fighting a fire, but we have to agree there's a fire. Otherwise, we're going to die. You're going to fight me trying to fight the fire. The folks who we have tried to deal with for many years haven't even agreed that there's a basic problem. Our concern is clean water. Some of the other folks on the other side of this issue are concerned about avoiding regulation and maximizing their profits, right?
Yes.
How do we come to the center there? I don't know if we can, but we talk about litigation, and we're involved in litigation, and you would think that we were Jesse James or the Barrow Gang. You know, I'm showing my age a little bit. Love Bonnie and Clyde, great movie. We are the evil ones who have come to town because we are trying to protect ourselves from upstream land uses that are poisoning our water supplies. And if you don't think that those water supplies are significantly denigrated, read the DNR report on impaired waters. Listen to what we're hearing nationally right now about what's going on with water, not just California and Texas and Colorado and the Southwest that's short on water. What happened in Toledo, Ohio a year ago?
Right.
They lost their entire drinking water because Lake Erie had a harmful algae plume that shut off their ability to be able to use that water safely. Charleston, West Virginia, about a year and a half ago, there was a chemical spill on a river, shut down their water supply. Those are extraordinary issues. But I suggest to you they're not extraordinary issues that can't happen to us as Iowans and are happening insidiously by water quality degradation that continues to haunt this state. So we're going to talk about public policy for a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Here's the public policy of this state as it relates to clean water. We're going to follow something called the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. Wow. Those of you who have had a chance to see the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, which is a collaborative effort coming out of Iowa State University, the Iowa Department of Agricultural and Land Stewardship, and the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and the Governor's Office, came up with some great science. The great science is this. The nutrients that are in our waters, our surface waters, that ultimately go to the Gulf of Mexico and cause hypoxia, nitrogen and phosphorus, 90% of that are from ag uses. That's good, strong, objective science. I want to tell you, as Johnson County people, there may be some people on the board of trustees of the university system that are trying to change the objectivism of how things happen in the university communities. University of Iowa is a leader in resisting that. It is not so easy for some of the other institutions in this state who rely heavily on corporate agricultural contributors to be able to stand up to that. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
I will tell you that I have the great pleasure of coming over here to Iowa City regularly and enjoy it. I have the great pleasure of going even to UNI and talking in the state system there. I'm from Stowe County. Boy, it's really rare that I get to go to that third state university. But I think I may have seen some of you at a Bernie Sanders event in Ames a few days ago. We have huge water quality problems in this state that we have to get our hands on. The nutrient reduction strategy says 90% of it's from agriculture, 10% are from wastewater treatment plants, industrial dischargers, city stormwater systems. What do we regulate in this state? The 10%. What do we leave unregulated? The 90%. Any kind of thought process there that we may be missing what the better area to regulate would be? And that the more we regulate the 10%, the more expensive it becomes for urban and suburban folks, and other folks get off. I have to tell you that I can't think of another business, certainly none that I've been involved in, that can take a pipe from their business and run it to the waters of this state and not be regulated. Agriculture can do that, and Des do it through their drainage districts each and every day. We have a serious problem in this state. We have a lack of state leadership, in my view, on this, and it's not just a Democrat or Republican issue. Both parties have fallen off on this issue horribly.
Right.
You have to ask yourselves as Iowans, are we something more than a big feedlot between the Mississippi and Missouri rivers? Because that's where we're heading, and that's what we have to stop. And we have to stop by reasonable regulation and reasonable discussions that will protect our surface waters in this state. They are not being protected now, and I can't think of any principled discussion that says that our water is improving over time. In my business, I'm concerned about a day-to-day result. What the pollutant level is when we open up the gate and let the water from the Raccoon River primarily into our plants every day. We have operated at denitrification units this year 120 days. Wow. We're what, June 4? That's a record for our history of denitrification. And we are in June. Wow. We've got 6 months left. That's a huge problem, and I'll tell you what the outcome will be if we're not very careful and very lucky. That is, we will violate the Safe Drinking Water Act, our regulation, and it will have economic development consequences for the middle of the state. It will have public health consequences for the middle of the state, and it'll certainly have recreational consequences for the middle of the state. Iowans should be ashamed of the surface water quality in this state. When we will not swim in reservoirs, in rivers and streams, in lakes, and know it's because of E. coli as an example. We know what the source is, but we refuse to regulate that and refuse to get our hands around this issue. It's an issue that will haunt us and certainly haunt the generations behind us if we do not get our hands around it and get our hands around it quickly. My message to you is to continue to be involved in groups like ICCI. ICCI is a fighter for economic justice issues above and beyond clean water. Certainly clean water is a very important issue for us. But they've been leaders as long as I have been in this or related business, and they will continue to lead the charge forward. You need to get involved in organizations that you're comfortable with, talk with state legislators, talk with mayors and city councils about the need to regulate for clean water. We're going to go home in a few hours to Des Moines and step into a vehicle that's a point source polluter. It has a catalytic converter on it. It's protecting the air of this state and of this nation from pollutants. I'm confident if we had this discussion 40 years ago when ICCI first came about, people would say, oh, there are too many of those things out there to regulate. How would you ever regulate them? You're going to have inspectors for each one of those cars? Does it sound familiar? Does it sound like the arguments we hear about why you can't regulate industrial agriculture in this state? You need too many people. It's too hard. There are too many sources of pollution. When we have a will, we have the ability to get our hands around it with a solution. We need to step up and deal with this issue before Iowa is nothing more than a big feedlot between the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. Thanks for your time. Let me try and answer some questions.
Can you tell us about the lawsuit?
Can I tell you about the lawsuit? I can tell you a little bit about the lawsuit.
Okay.
Let me tell you what I can only tell you a little bit about the lawsuit, because I'm a lawyer, and one of the ethical constraints that we're under is not to try, I'll kind of shortcut it here, to poison the jury pool by talking too much in the public arena in a way that might affect potential jurors. I don't think you're going to be potential jurors anyway in this part of the state. We're up in Sioux City. But the long and short of it is this. We have filed an action under the Clean Water Act, federal legislation, saying that drainage districts and drainage tiles are point source polluters. They are moving groundwater that's polluted in violation of federal law into the waters of this state. So we have filed that action and named about 10 drainage districts, most of which are in Sac County, up around Sac City, as the defendants. Were there a lot of other people we could name? Of course there were. We picked them primarily because we spent a year getting data on these drainage tile outlets into the Raccoon River, or a tributary to the Raccoon River. So we have really good data that shows that the number is 10 that we have to provide denitrified water to you as a consumer. We were getting drainage tile numbers that were from 70 down into the 30s regularly. So we view that these are very clearly point source polluters. The other side will tell you it's an agricultural exemption. You can't regulate agriculture. we're ready to fight that issue, and we'll fight it as hard as we can.
Who's paying for the commercials that we're seeing against it on TV?
We believe that the commercials are being, I'm sorry, who is paying for the commercials that are showing on TV
Against the
for the Clean Water Alliance? Do I have that right, Ron? I'm sorry. Clean Water Partnership. Our look, and Ron is a member of that group. I look at the mailing address and the public filings, and it looks surprisingly like it's the Farm Bureau of Iowa. Sir?
You take the nitrates out.
Yes, is the answer to your question.
What do you do later?
We return them to the Raccoon, I'm not going to spill it, I promise you. We return it to the Raccoon River under our permit. Are we proud of that? We're not, but let me give you a little background.
Right, yeah, our daughter told us that there was a gas that they just dump it down the next guy. to take
Yeah,
it.
let me explain why, or try to explain why. First of all, the technology that we have was built in 1992 because we violated the Clean Water Act and had to denitrify. It is the equivalent of a beta technology to your DVD technology now. It uses ionization to take the water out after it's cleaned, otherwise clean, take the nitrate out with salt. We have to do something with it. We can't break the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is pretty complicated, but when nitrogen is introduced by the producers into the water cycle, there are really basically only two ways to break that. One of them is through plant uptake, and the other is through a microbiological process that releases it into the nitrogen into the atmosphere. We don't do that. We clean water. To do that, there are technologies out there, very expensive, we believe, to replace our current technology, which is aged and too small, realistically, for our growing population. It's a $150 million issue. So we can't break the nitrate cycle or the nitrogen cycle more exactly by simply taking it out and sending it to Mars.
Right.
It's a little bit like if you go home and find somebody's illegally dumped in your front yard, you got to pick it up.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing?
Adam, you
One
can add more than
of the
one.
responses that when I hear people ask that question, he wouldn't have to take it out if it wasn't in there.
No, I mean, well, yeah, I know. And then somebody else will have to take that again and
Right.
again and again and again.
You know, it's absolutely not an easy story to tell. I wish it were not the truth, but it is the truth. We return it to the water cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
Sure.
that's-
Do you have any, can you give us a picture of the relative amount of nitrate that's being returned versus the total nitrate
Yeah.
load in the river?
Now we get into some numbers. When we see a high flow kind of day like we're seeing today, as an example, where we've had some pretty wet weather in western and west central Iowa, north central Iowa, we're returning about 0.1% of the nitrate that comes past us on the river. So we're going to be a small net addition to the process. Still doesn't change the fact that the optics of that still look goofy. I'm complaining about people upstream putting nitrogen in the water. We're putting nitrogen in the water. It's a no net addition circumstance. Actually, we're not, again, introducing it. We're perpetuating it. Right. What I'm looking at it. Yes, ma'am.
Who are the attorneys in the lawsuit?
Wait, before we go on, can I add to what we were just talking about?
Sure. And I will answer the attorney's question in just a second. Back on the nitrogen cycle.
Right, I might be incorrect about this, but what I understand is the way we do farming now is because we made chemicals in World War I and they wanted a market for it, so they sold it to farmers, so we put chemicals on the land, right? Is that correct?
Certainly put hydrous ammonia as a chemical.
That's where the nitrogens come from.
That's
And
one of the
we
sources.
used to raise food before without all that chemicals, so I'm just saying we wouldn't have to dump it downstream if we didn't put it there in the first place.
Yeah, there's no question that from our vantage, the producers are introducing it, we're cleaning it, and then we have no choice because we can't break the cycle but to put it back into the water. We are looking at some alternatives to that, incidentally, but they're not easy scientifically. Now, the attorneys. We're represented by the Dickinson law firm in Des Moines. Waterworks has been in business since right after the Civil War. That law firm has represented us since then. So we've got some good environmental folks and people who very much understand our business. On the other side is the Bellin law firm, B-E-L-I-N. David Bellin was on the Warren Commission, if you recall. that investigated President
Is that
Kennedy's.
Ellen Blanc people?
Not that I'm aware of, there's BLIN.
Yeah, same thing. Well, I was just curious. And that's on the other side.
They are representing the drainage districts and the counties. I failed to mention that drainage districts are actually managed by the boards of county supervisors in the counties in which they sit. So we've sued the districts and the elected boards of county supervisors and SAC, what Vista, and Calhoun counties. Ma'am?
So you said this was going to be a federal lawsuit?
Correct.
This is kind of maybe a minor issue, but you didn't want to influence anybody here, which more likely wouldn't be on the jury, but would there be a chance of a change of venue to say to send it to Montana or someplace else? Or would it be
No,
held
and
in Iowa?
I don't claim to be a federal procedure expert, but the rules for reassigning or moving are pretty complicated, and they're basically intended to keep from prejudicing a jury. I am pretty confident there will not be a jury trial here. This will be a judge's trial, bench trial, as opposed to a jury trial. And I would be very surprised whether either of us would have any basis for moving it. We have, just to take it one step further, we have a choice as the plaintiffs of suing in the Southern District of Iowa, in Des Moines or Sioux City. We chose Sioux City. That was our choice.
Ma'am, I'll get you right next, sir. You're asking his question, or he's asking yours?
She's raising her hand for me.
Okay, please.
So let's say the suit is successful at some date.
Yep.
Are the solutions being proposed by the Farm Bureau and the governor's agricultural department, are they capable of keeping the nitrates on the farm through, the methods that are being
Great
discussed?
question.
Great question. His question is, if you're successful, do you think the current conservation practices that are being proposed by the Farm Bureau and Industrial Ag are going to keep nitrates and phosphorus, nutrients, on the land? I certainly think it has the ability to make a huge inroad in that. Do I ever expect that nitrate concentrations on the Des Moines or Raccoon River to be zero? No. Do I expect them to be beneath 10? Yes. But there are things that can be done. ISU's agronomy department is one of the best in the United States. Even though I take my shot at ISU for their lack of academic freedom, thank God the agronomists at Iowa State are a free-thinking group that have some great solutions. They're the ones who talk about cover crops, saturated buffers, bioreactors. There are things that can be done in terms of rotation of crops now instead of these monocrops that we're seeing. Other things that can happen in terms of a four-crop rotation as an example that will have an impact of reducing the nitrogen migration off the fields, but there are also things on the edge of fields. Bioreactors are an example. You tell me as an engineer that I have a pipe, you have a pipe. There are things I can put on the end of that pipe, like a tailpipe on a car, that will remove the pollutants. There are things that can be done with that open pipe that we have not even begun to get our hands around because there's been no incentive to do that. There's been no regulation required that. Yes, the easy answer to your question is I think that what we are asking for here in NPDES, a permit process for the drainage districts, will greatly reduce that. But I also want to point out, we're talking about nitrogen today. 5 years from now, we could be talking about animal antibiotics or whatever the issue du jour is coming out. That's why, in my view, the issue's a lot bigger than nitrate removal. It's going to the source of the problem, which is at the producer level, and holding agriculture accountable for what's coming off their land, just like any other business.
I just think that, one of the positive things that will come out of this is we can advocate for solutions as opposed to just raising the flag of, doing a bad thing here. So if we can advocate for solutions, then we can be part of the solution.
They need their nose right first.
There's no question, in my view, that regulation is a very value-laden term. Like I'm taking antihypertensives, where the pharmacist is regulated. When I go to a dentist, I'm really glad that she's regulated.
When I eat food, I'm really glad that somebody is checking out the licensing and sanitary issues associated with that. We have been imprinted with the idea that regulation is bad. Regulation for public health is a necessity.
Sir?
Recently, the Cedar Rapids Gazette, along with other newspapers in the state, reported on the worsening conditions of our surface water. And I wonder if, in your view, that message that was carried has chastened the advocates of a voluntary approach and or moderated their position in any way.
Well, the Gazette, first of all, does a great job in environmental reporting, and we appreciate that because this is a statewide issue. It's really a regional issue that involves all of us from ag states. Do I think it is emboldening the process in a way that we are seeing some pushback? Certainly. I mean, here's the reality, and I look around the room at an age cohort a lot like mine. When I grew up in this state, to think that somebody would stand here with a microphone in their hand, talking into a camera in front of electeds, and say something bad about the Farm Bureau? We can do that.
Wow, time.
We can do that. The demographics of this state are changing. Those of us from central Iowa certainly understand the importance of agriculture, but industrial agriculture is ruining our state, not enriching it.
Yeah.
So push back.
I farmed organically for 25 years, so I know
Thank
it's
you.
a great problem. What we're hearing tonight is the connection between climate change and the changes in atmosphere. And if we address some of those, it'll bring the nitrogen use
Way down.
down to zero is where it needs to be.
Yeah, great question.
Synthetically produced nitrogen.
His point is, as an organic farmer in Iowa City, Johnson County, great in local foods movement and organic farming and progressive farming. Shouldn't we talk more about climate change? And that's certainly something that I love to talk about. For those of you who don't think climate change is real, you're probably in the wrong place. You may want to go to another meeting. It is very real, and we have a number of things that we need to be talking about at the national and international policy level. But it requires regulation. I mean, I remember when phosphates were taken out of detergents, and we regulated aerosol cans because of chlorofluorocarbons that were punching holes in our ozone. That's done at the international level to some degree. Hell, we can't even keep our government funded for every 6 months. So I think we have to pick off the issues as they come. Climate change, a huge issue and a very real issue. And in my business, it creates all kinds of concerns because your demand is very cyclical based on climate change issues. I know a lot of my customers, unlike folks in Johnston County, love to have beautiful green manicured lawns with Scott's Turf Builder thrown on it on a regular basis. And when it's dry, what do? They irrigate it. So, wow, we've got a lot of education to do on vegetation, on robust horticultural changes, and in our case as consumers, for a lawn that looks like a golf course. Mine looks more like a weed crop, incidentally, but that's a personal taste that I can get away with. One more question, sir.
Okay. This piggybacks a little bit on some of those questions back there. Minnesota, I believe, just passed a mandatory buffer law. I don't know what's going to happen in the future regarding that. Has anyone quantified the resulting reduction in nitrate and other soil phosphorus pollution that will accrue from mandatory buffers in Minnesota and what they were applying on?
The question goes to the state of Minnesota, where Governor Mark Dayton, a great leader on environmental issues, has pushed forward on mandatory buffer areas around waterways in the state. And the state of Minnesota actually has had, I think, a 1 rod requirement for a number of years. The governor has gone to what's essentially 2 or 3 rods, that is 50 feet. A lot of fighting about that, and has anybody quantified basically that benefit? You know, I'm really confident that our friends at Iowa State can answer that question in the agronomy area, answer that question better than I can, but here's one thing you want to keep in mind. Saturated buffer strips are what are necessary because we have piping systems in the area of the state that I'm from that go underneath those buffers and immediately discharge into the waterways. You have to bring them up to the surface and put them over that buffer strip for it to be successful. And that's, again, a little vocabulary, a little bit different in my area of the state than it is in this area where there aren't a lot of drainage districts and aren't the concentration of drainage tiles that are in Central Ohio. But a great question. It is always a pleasure to be at a CCI discussion for anything and everything. I love being back in Johnson County. Thanks for having me. I'm going to be around for the rest of the night.